10 videos getting started with Python. I'm assuming that you've already have Python set up and you already watched the first video in this series that's talking about arithmetic expressions and operators. So if you haven't, you can go back to watch that one. So now we're going to do talking about data types in Python. And just for variety, we will go into the idle program. So if we look wherever you keep your program, so on a Mac it's applications, on Windows it would be start, on Linux it would be something else. So I'm going to go into my Python3 and run idle. Okay, so I'm at the Python console, also called the Python shell. Data types. All right, so just as a preview, we have, so on this page that lists all the keywords in Python, which we'll say more about in a minute, the first 4 things here are data types in Python. Okay, so we have numbers that we looked at in the previous video, and there's 2 different types of numbers, which we'll see in a second. We also saw things that are true or false. That's called Boolean. And we have text. Okay, so the programming word for just text is string. And let's just look at these. Let's start with strings. Okay, so let's say that my name is Jeff. In Python, anything that's in between quotes is a string. And it could be double quotes or single quotes. They just have to match up. Okay, so things that we can do with strings. Let's say that my last name is Kenny. With numbers, you can do plus, and it just adds the numbers. In Python with strings, with text, you can do plus, and what do you think it will do? So it takes the text and just puts one after another. If I want to have a space in between there, then I need to have a space in between my quotes. So this is a string. This right here is actually a string that just is one space. And then this is a string. And there it is. And if I wanted to save that result, then I would have to save it into a variable. Maybe I'll call it full name. So now I have a string that's the full name. Okay, so that is strings. We have strings and we have numbers. Boolean we already had. That's 3 is less than 5. We could save that into a value, whatever, into a variable. So we could say x equals 3 is less than 5. Now if I type x, what's it going to say? True. So I can save that true or false value and then potentially do something later with it if I want to. Numbers in Python are by default what we call floating point numbers. Floating point means that it's keeping track of a decimal point. So if I did 1/2, that's 1/2. If I did 1//2, that's with rounding. Now if I want to force Python to give me an integer, then I could also do, so x is 1/2. I could say int x, converts it to an integer, and that just rounds down. All right, so now for some tricks. 1 + 2 × 3 is 7 because order of operations, the multiplication happens before the addition. Now, how about 1 plus 2 like this? What do you think will happen? There's two possibilities. Either it's going to say that these are numbers and add them and be 3, or it's going to say it's text. So it says that it's text, and the result has the quotes there. It's still text, and it just combined them like we did up here. Okay, so something you have to remember, anything in between quotes is a string. So if I say true and false, true and true, looked like it converted. Let's look at true plus false. So there it combined them together. What if I tried to do true plus false? Which is a strange result, perhaps. True plus true. So here, when I do plus with the Boolean, it's viewing true as the value 1, and true is the value 1 to get to. True is the value 1, and false is the value 0. So it is actually doing some conversion there from Boolean to integer. And here it seems to be doing a conversion from string to Boolean. Okay, so let's say that we do 1 plus 2. That's a string, 1, 2. What if I do int 1 plus int 2? The order of operations is that before I try to do the plus, I have to figure out what this is. And if I just do that on its own, that's 1. And if I do int 2 on its own, that's 2, and it's the integer 1 and 2. So if I combine those together, that's 3 because I converted them to integers. Okay. So quick quiz, what are the basic data types in Python? There are 4 basic data types. There's string, which is text, Boolean is true or false, and then numbers can either be floating point, and that's the default, or integer. There's also a special value called none, which is a special Python value to mean basically nothing. So if I do none plus none, it doesn't like that because it's not like 0, it's just none. And you see that it didn't give me back true or false when I did and, it's just nothing. Okay, so those are the basic data types and the way to combine them. So to finish up, I want to say something about variables and keywords and functions. So we'll sort of have this section of this page covered. In the last video, we looked at variables, and here we've been using a couple variables as well. So we could have exam1 is maybe 68, exam2 is 82, exam3 is 70. So I have 3 variables there. And if I wanted to take the average of them, I could. That would be the simple average with no weighting. Okay, so anytime I have text in Python, there's 2 different things it's looking for. if the text is in between quotes, then what does Python think? It thinks it's just text. It's not a variable name or anything like that. It's just text. Okay, so if it's in between quotes, that's called a string. If it's not in between quotes, it's thinking that either it's a variable or it's what we call a Python keyword or reserved word. So up above in this page, these are all the words in Python that have special meaning that we'll be getting to. And you see there, and, or, not, the Boolean operators. So if I say and, Python thinks I'm wanting to do the logical and operation. I should not try to use and as a variable name. So syntax error means I'm not allowed to do that. That's a reserved word. So the same thing with true or false, those are special. You can't use those as variable names. All right, so if you're not in between quotes, then first is Python's checking to see, is it a reserved word, a keyword? If it is, then it's going to use it to do whatever it does. If it's not, then it's checking to see, is it a variable? So we can have variables, and there's another thing called a function. So a function is the name for a piece of code that we can run that does something useful. There's something called print in Python, and if you go down here, we're going to talk more about functions, but for now I just want to be able to use a function. So there's function name, and then parameters in between parentheses. And that gives me an error message because there's nothing called function name, but that's the general way to do it. So there is something called print, and it expects things, potentially more than one, to print. What if I do len hello? What do you think len would mean if I give it a string? That is how many characters, how many letters? What if I do len 3 equals 4? So first of all, what is the data type of this? It's a string. It's in between quotes. All right, how many characters are there? It's either going to be 3 or 5. 3 is if you count those, but then in between the 3 and the equal is a space. So does that count as a character, as a letter? All right, so for strings, a character is one spot in the string and spaces count. What if I do len with a capital L? You can see there that it looks different. This is purple. This is colored black. And that says, if we look here at the bottom, it says what the problem was. Name len is not defined. So it's looking for something called capital len, and it doesn't exist. So this tells us that Python is case sensitive. Uppercase and lowercase are different. I can say x equals 3, uppercase x equals 5, x plus uppercase x is 8. So I could have two different variables. They are two different things to Python. Python is case sensitive, and that goes for everything. Variable names, reserved words, so I can have a variable called true, lowercase. I could make it something that is strange. So here I have lowercase true has the value false, and lowercase false actually has the value of true. So the reserved word in Python is with this capitalization. What would I get if I did true and true? This is the lowercase true. which has the value false. So it's the same as saying false and false. Okay. All right. So those are the basic data types. And we'll leave that like that. The next video in our basic